My quiet street was usually filled with the scent of jasmine, but one afternoon it reeked of exhaust, fear, and the impossible power of my unassuming, elderly neighbor. The scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass hung heavy in the warm afternoon air, a sweet perfume that usually calmed my soul. I was walking home from my flower shop, petal and stem, with a tote bag slung over my shoulder, heavy with a new book and groceries for dinner. It had been a good day, a profitable day. The sun was warm on my skin, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening with a glass of wine and my new novel. My neighborhood was the kind of place where you still saw kids playing hopscotch on the sidewalk, and neighbors waved as you passed. It was peaceful. It was safe. That peace was shattered by a guttural roar that ripped through the fabric of the afternoon. It started as a distant rumble and grew exponentially louder, like a storm rolling in at impossible speed. 3 motorcycles tore around the corner, their engines popping and snarling, a cloud of exhaust fumes momentarily blotting out the sun. They weren't the sleek, modern bikes you sometimes saw on weekends. These were old, loud, and mean-looking choppers, ridden by men who looked like they were carved from granite and soaked in grease. They skidded to a halt, forming a perfect, intimidating semicircle that completely blocked the sidewalk in front of me. My steps faltered. My heart, which had been beating a slow, contented rhythm, suddenly started hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. There were 3 of them. All wore faded leather vests covered in patches I didn't recognize, their arms thick with faded, intricate tattoos. The one in the middle, clearly the leader, killed his engine. The sudden relative silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. He was a mountain of a man with a wild salt and pepper beard that obscured most of his face, but it couldn't hide the cruel smirk twisting his lips. He swung a thick leg over his bike and stood up, planting his boots on the pavement with a sense of ownership, as if this quiet suburban sidewalk belonged to him. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice a gravelly rumble that matched his engine. "Look what we have here, a little flower, all alone." His 2 companions chuckled, a harsh, ugly sound. They stayed on their bikes, engines idling, creating a low, threatening vibration that I could feel in the soles of my shoes. I clutched the strap of my tote bag, the canvas a flimsy shield against their leering eyes. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd like to get by." The leader took a step closer. The smell of stale beer, cigarettes, and unwashed leather washed over me, and I had to fight the urge to recoil. "In a hurry?" he sneered, his eyes roaming over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Don't you know it's rude not to stop and chat with your neighbors?" "You're not my neighbors," I stated, keeping my chin up. "I've learned that showing fear to bullies is like bleeding in a tank full of sharks. You stand your ground. You don't let them see you tremble." He laughed, a loud barking sound that had no humor in it. "Maybe we're thinking of moving in. Place needs a little color." He winked at his friends, and the implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. My blood ran cold, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. "Just let me pass," I said, my voice dropping to a low, firm tone. He took another step, closing the distance until he was directly in my personal space. I could see the yellow stains on his teeth, the broken capillaries in his eyes. "You got a feisty mouth on you," he grunted, his smirk fading into something uglier. "I don't like a feisty mouth on a woman like you. You need to learn some respect." My entire body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do something. But I was frozen, trapped by the 2 idling bikes and the hulking man in front of me. I refused to look away, to give him the satisfaction of my submission. I met his gaze, my own eyes blazing with a fury I prayed he could see. "Get out of my way," I whispered, the words filled with a dangerous calm. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, as if he was surprised I still had the nerve to speak. Then, his face contorted into a mask of rage. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Before I could even process the question, his hand flew up. The motion was a blur. The sound was a sharp, sickening crack that echoed in the quiet street. My head snapped to the side, my cheek erupting in a blaze of white-hot pain. The world tilted, my vision swam, and a high-pitched ringing filled my ears. The strap of my tote bag slipped from my shoulder, and it hit the pavement with a dull thud, spilling my groceries. An apple rolled slowly to a stop near his dusty boot. For a moment there was only the ringing in my ears and the throbbing, humiliating sting on my face. His two friends were laughing now, whooping with delight. The leader stood over me, his chest puffed out, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "See?" he said, his voice seeming to come from a great distance. "That's how you teach some respect." He was about to say something else, still gloating, when another voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm, steady, and carried an unnerving weight of authority. "I believe," the voice said from somewhere behind me, "the lady asked you to leave her alone." The laughter from the other two bikers died in their throats. The leader's smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. He slowly, almost reluctantly, turned his head to look past me, his eyes narrowing. And in that moment, for the first time since they had arrived, I saw a flash of something in his eyes that wasn't arrogance or cruelty. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of genuine fear. I turned my head slowly, the movement sending a fresh jolt of pain through my cheekbone. My eyes watered, blurring the figure standing at the end of the walkway. He was just a man, an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a neat crest of silver hair and a kind, wrinkled face. He was wearing a simple beige cardigan over a plaid button-down shirt and a pair of well-worn gardening gloves. It was my neighbor, Mr. Allister, the quiet retired librarian who lived 2 houses down, the man who spent his afternoons tending to his prize-winning roses and always left a copy of the Sunday paper on my porch if mine got wet in the rain. The biker leader let out a choked, incredulous laugh. He turned his back on me completely, as if I was no longer a factor, and sized up the old man. "You talking to me, pups?" he sneered, spreading his arms wide. "You think you're going to do something?" The other 2 bikers revved their engines, a chorus of metallic laughter. "Go back to your knitting, old man," one of them yelled. I scrambled to my knees, a new kind of terror seizing me. This wasn't a fair fight. This was a slaughter waiting to happen. Mr. Allister was a sweet, frail man. These brutes would snap him in two. "Mr. Allister, no!" I pleaded, my voice hoarse. "Please, just go inside. Call the police." He didn't even look at me. His gaze, a surprisingly sharp and focused blue, was locked on the leader. "I won't ask again," he said, his voice retaining that same unnerving calm. It didn't waver. It didn't shake. It was as steady as a surgeon's hand. "Get on your machine and leave this neighborhood. Now." The leader took a deliberate, menacing step toward him. "Or what? You gonna hit me with your prune juice?" He was laughing as he moved, a full-bellied, arrogant sound. He was closing the distance, getting right up in Mr. Allister's face, using his sheer size to intimidate. I watched, my heart lodged in my throat, as the biker's massive frame completely eclipsed the old man. I shut my eyes, unable to watch the inevitable violence, but there was no cry of pain, no sickening thud of a fist meeting flesh. There was a soft whoosh of air, a grunt of surprise, and then a sound that I will never forget. It was a sharp, wet crack, like a thick branch being snapped over a knee, followed immediately by a heavy, solid impact as something massive hit the pavement. My eyes flew open. The biker leader was on the ground. He was lying on his back, his eyes wide with shock and agony. His right arm bent at an angle that was fundamentally, horribly wrong. He was gasping, trying to scream, but only a wheezing, pathetic sound came out. Mr. Allister stood over him, not even breathing heavily. He hadn't moved from his spot. He was looking down at the writhing man with an expression of mild disappointment, as if scolding a child who had tracked mud through the house. The world seemed to grind to a halt. The other 2 bikers stared, their leering grins frozen on their faces, slowly melting into slack-jawed disbelief. The rumbling engines of their bikes sounded distant, like a memory. They looked from their fallen leader on the ground to the unassuming old man in the cardigan, and their eyes, which moments before had been filled with cruel amusement, now held a new emotion. Raw, primal terror. They weren't looking at a retired librarian anymore. They were looking at a monster. The second biker, a lanky man with a greasy ponytail, seemed to shake himself out of his stupor first. His face hardened, a mixture of fury and fear. He killed his engine, the sudden silence deafening, and swung his leg off his bike. He reached behind him, and my blood ran cold as his hand closed around a heavy metal chain wrapped around his seat. "You broke his arm," the biker hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You're a dead man, you old freak." Mr. Alistair finally turned his gaze from the man on the ground and settled it on the one approaching with the chain. He slowly, deliberately began to pull off his gardening gloves, one finger at a time. "His arm will heal," he said, his voice still impossibly serene. "What I'm about to do to you, however, will be permanent." The biker with the ponytail let out a guttural roar and lunged forward, swinging the heavy chain in a wide, vicious arc aimed right at Mr. Alistair's head. The lynx whistled through the air, a blur of tarnished metal designed to crush bone. I screamed, a raw, helpless sound torn from my throat. This was it. There was no way he could dodge that. It was too fast, too brutal. I squeezed my eyes shut again, bracing for the sickening crunch. But the sound never came. Instead, I heard a sharp clang, like a blacksmith's hammer striking an anvil, followed by a choked gasp of pain. My eyes flew open to a scene that defied all logic. Mr. Alistair hadn't dodged. He had moved with a speed that was utterly incongruous with his age and appearance. He'd met the chain head-on, not with his body, but with his forearm. It was as if he'd simply raised his arm to block the blow, a move that should have resulted in a shattered bone. But his arm hadn't broken. The chain had. Several links in the middle of the heavy metal whip had snapped clean apart, the broken ends falling harmlessly to the pavement. The biker stared at the broken chain in his hand, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. He looked at his weapon, then at the old man's arm, then back again. Mr. Alistair's cardigan sleeve was slightly torn, revealing a glimpse of the flesh beneath. It was pale and crisscrossed with a faint, silvery latticework of old scars, but it wasn't bruised, wasn't bleeding. It was completely unharmed. "Impossible," the biker whispered, his bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. "A cheap alloy," Mr. Alistair commented, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the quality of a garden tool. He took a single, fluid step forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. Before the biker could react, before he could even back away, Mr. Alistair's hand shot out. It wasn't a punch. It was something else. His fingers were stiff and straight, like a spear point. He didn't strike the man's face or chest. He gently, almost delicately tapped him on the throat, right over his Adam's apple. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The biker dropped the broken chain. His eyes bulged. He clutched at his neck with both hands, his face turning a deep, terrifying shade of purple. He made a horrible gurgling sound like he was trying to breathe through water, and then his legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing, his desperate, silent struggle for air. The only sound in the suddenly still afternoon. Now only one remained. The third biker, the one who had stayed on his bike, a heavy-set man with a face like a bulldog, had watched the entire exchange with wide, terrified eyes. He saw his leader on the ground, arm mangled. He saw his friend on his knees, suffocating without a mark on him. And he saw the calm, elderly man in the beige cardigan turn to face him. Panic finally shattered the biker's paralysis. He didn't try to fight. He didn't try to help his friends. He fumbled with his bike's handlebars, trying to get it turned around on the narrow sidewalk. The engine roared back to life as he twisted the throttle, his one goal to escape. He was going to run. He was going to leave his friends behind and just get away from the quiet old man who was dismantling his entire world. He managed to get the bike pointed back down the street, the front wheel bumping off the curb and onto the asphalt. He gave the throttle a hard twist, the engine screaming as the bike lurched forward. Freedom was just a few feet away. "I wouldn't," Mr. Alistair said, his voice cutting through the engine's roar. The biker ignored him. He was already moving, picking up speed. In 2 seconds he'd be gone. Mr. Alistair stooped down, his movements unhurried. His hand closed around the apple that had rolled out of my grocery bag, the one that had come to a stop near the first biker's boot. He straightened up, his eyes tracking the fleeing motorcycle. He held the apple for a moment, weighing it in his palm. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, like he was skipping a stone across a pond, He threw it. The apple didn't arc through the air. It flew in a perfectly straight line, a small red missile. It moved with impossible velocity, a crimson blur against the green lawns and blue sky. It struck the fleeing biker squarely in the back of his helmet. The impact was shockingly loud. Not the soft thump of fruit hitting plastic, but a sharp, explosive crack, like a rifle shot. The biker's expensive-looking helmet spiderwebbed with fractures, then seemed to disintegrate. The man's entire body went rigid for a split second, and then he was simply launched from the moving bike, flying head over heels through the air like a rag doll. He landed in a crumpled heap on someone's lawn, 20 feet away, and didn't move. The now riderless motorcycle veered sharply, hit the opposite curb, and crashed onto its side with a deafening shriek of scraping metal, the rear wheel still spinning uselessly in the air. Silence fell once more, broken only by the whimpering of the first biker and the gurgling gasps of the second. I was still on the ground, staring at the scene of absolute carnage. 3 large, dangerous men, taken down in less than a minute, by my quiet, elderly neighbor, with his bare hands, and an apple. Mr. Allister turned away from the wreckage, his expression unreadable. He walked over to me, his footsteps soft on the pavement. He knelt down beside me, his kind blue eyes now filled with a gentle concern that was so at odds with the devastating violence I had just witnessed. "Are you all right, my dear?" he asked, his voice soft again, the terrifying authority gone as if it had never been there. He reached out a hand, not to me, but to my spilled groceries, and began carefully placing the scattered items back into my tote bag. "That was quite a tumble. I do hope your book wasn't damaged." My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I stared at him, this man I thought I knew, as he calmly repacked my groceries. One moment he was a demon of precise, calculated violence. The next he was a kindly neighbor worried about my bruised fruit. My cheek throbbed, a painful reminder of how this all started. I flinched as he reached for the last item, the new novel I'd been so excited to read. He picked it up, brushing a speck of dirt from the cover before placing it gently in my bag. What are you?" I finally managed to whisper, the words catching in my dry throat. He looked up from the bag, his eyes meeting mine. The gentle warmth was still there, but beneath it I could now see a profound weariness, a sadness as deep as an ocean. He offered me a small, wry smile. "A retired librarian," he said. The words a quiet echo of the lie. "Just a man who prefers a peaceful neighborhood." He stood up, extending a hand to help me to my feet. His grip was firm and steady, his hand surprisingly warm. I rose on shaky legs, my gaze sweeping over the scene again. The first biker was now cradling his broken arm, tears of pain and terror streaming down his face. The second was still on his knees, his breathing a ragged, painful rasp, but at least he was breathing. The third hadn't moved. The quiet hum of an approaching siren began to cut through the air. Someone must have called the police when the commotion started. "They'll be here soon," Mr. Allister said, as if reading my mind. He looked at the 3 men with a dispassionate air. "They will have questions." He then turned his full attention back to me, his expression serious. "You will tell them the truth, Eleanor. You will tell them these men accosted you. You will tell them they blocked your path and struck you." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "And you will tell them that you fought back." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Me? But I didn't do this." "Didn't you?" he asked, a strange glint in his eye. He gently touched his finger to my throbbing cheek. "You were assaulted. You feared for your life. In the ensuing struggle, they were injured. The one who fled crashed his own motorcycle. It's a messy, chaotic story, but it's a believable one. Far more believable," he added, his voice dropping lower, "than an old man in a cardigan breaking bones with a touch and felling a man with a piece of fruit." I understood then. He was giving me a story, a shield. He was protecting me, not just from the bikers, but from the impossible truth of what he was. The sirens were much closer now, their wail growing louder with each passing second. "They will need evidence," he continued, his voice calm and instructive. He looked down at his own hands, the ones that had wrought such devastation, and then at mine. "Clench your fist." I did as he said, my hand still trembling. He gently took my closed fist and with his other hand guided my knuckles to lightly brush against the cheek of the first biker, who was too consumed by his own agony to even notice. "Self-defense," Mr. Alistair whispered. "You will have bruised knuckles to match your bruised cheek, a detail that lends credibility." The first police car rounded the corner, its lights flashing. Mr. Alistair stepped back from me, melting back into the persona of the concerned neighbor, the quiet, harmless man who tended his roses. He picked up his discarded gardening gloves from the sidewalk and dusted them off. "I saw the whole thing from my window, officer," I heard him say as two policemen rushed towards the scene, their hands on their holsters. "This brave young woman, they attacked her, and she fought like a cornered lion. Absolutely astonishing." And so that's the story I told. Through tears of shock and lingering fear, I recounted the tale he had given me. I told them how the men had cornered me, how the leader had struck me. I told them that in the ensuing panic, I had fought back, kicking and swinging my heavy tote bag. It was a blur, I said. I remembered one of them falling, another choking as my bag strap caught his throat, and the third panicking and crashing his bike. It felt like a lie, but as I looked at the undeniable evidence, my swollen cheek, my soon-to-be bruised knuckles, the terror in the biker's eyes, it became a strange kind of truth. They were big, but they were clumsy. I was small, but I was desperate. The police, seeing a distraught woman and three notorious-looking thugs, one with a clearly broken arm, were more than willing to believe it. The paramedics arrived, loading the three bikers onto stretchers. As they carried the leader past me, his eyes, wild with pain, locked onto mine. There was no anger in them, only pure, unadulterated fear. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, at the quiet old man standing by his rose bushes, calmly watching the whole affair. Later that evening, long after the police had left and the street had returned to its normal, placid state, I sat on my porch swing, nursing a cup of tea. My whole body ached, my cheek was a painful purple, but I felt a strange sense of calm. A small brown paper bag sat on the porch railing. I hadn't seen him leave it. Inside were two perfect, shining red apples and a small leather-bound book of poetry by Rilke. There was no note. There didn't need to be. I never asked Mr. Alistair who he was, or what he had been. I didn't need to know about his past, about the scars I'd seen on his arm, or the terrifying skills he kept hidden behind a gentle smile and a beige cardigan. I just knew that I lived next to a guardian, a quiet librarian who had, for reasons of his own, chosen a life of peace among the roses. But I also knew, with absolute certainty, that if anyone ever tried to shatter that peace again, they would discover, as three bikers had learned that afternoon, that some books are best left unopened, and some gardens are far from defenseless.